Hi everyone, I'm Lara Pack from the Medtronic Diabetes team. I'm here today a new way to deliver insulin with the MiniMed 670G. So to really understand this, we have to take a little bit of a walk back through the evolution of insulin pump technology from Medtronic Diabetes. And it's been quite a journey from a number of years ago. So if we start with what you can currently see, which was this concept of how insulin pump technology would work, it was pretty cumbersome, and I'm sure that we would all have challenges talking to people with diabetes about why they should use this. But if we look at where Medtronic really started, zooming in on it, we started with the 507C. And the 507C was really the first time we came up with insulin delivery through a different mechanism other than using injections. So what it provided was continuous basal, but it did manual bolus. So essentially it was an automatic injection for a bolus where you'd go in and give yourself 1 unit, kind of like how we use manual bolus today, but it gave us that background basal, which was more physiological than any other way that we delivered prior to that. The next one that we brought out was the X12. And the X12 was the very first time that we used what we call today the bolus wizard. And this again was revolutionary in the way that we deliver insulin, because it was the first time that we could allow an algorithm in the pump to work out how many units a person needed based on what they put in. So someone would put in, I'm having X grams or X exchanges, and my blood sugar level is currently this, and my target is this. This is how long the insulin works for. This is where I want to be. And basically what the pump would do is take all that information and work out how much to give you. And you'd probably all be really familiar with that because all pumps today are using the bolus wizard. We then moved through a few different iterations. So we had our X22, which was the first time we integrated CGM. And between then and basically up until today, everything has been an extension on this CGM. So we started off with just being able to have a display. Then we moved to VAO, which was suspending on low, where the pump would shut off for 2 hours and then it would resume. And then we moved to 640, which was where it would suspend before low. So it would suspend up to 30 minutes before someone was expected to have a hypoglycemia, and then it would have a minimum refractory period of 30 minutes and then resume in order to let the person come back out of having hypoglycemia without having too much risk of hyperglycemia. So what you can see now is today we've got the MiniMed 670G. And if you have a look back through our evolution, it's really the first time we've changed the way that the insulin is delivered. So not only have we added the additional component of hybrid closed loop, which means that we've got an automatic basal, and we can now basically have insulin varied for the person depending on what they need. But this is the first time essentially in 20 years that we've changed the way that insulin is delivered through this device. And I'm going to talk to you today about why that's happened and why that's so important and crucial for people who have diabetes. So if we take a look, there's a lot of things that we learned from the MiniMed 640G. We know that 75 to 80% of hypos were avoided, which was critical. That's exactly why it came out. We know that hypoglycemia is one of the biggest barriers to getting good control into A1C. We also know that on average, the suspends were 2.9 times a day, and that was across the board. We also know that the average duration of suspend was 56 minutes. So if we add all those things up, what we're looking at is 2.7 hours per day on average that was spent suspended. When we first brought it out, I think one of the things that we thought about was, well, if it's suspending, it must mean that the basal rate's wrong. So we need to change the basal rate. So we spent a lot of time adapting the basal rate and trying to optimize it and fix it and looking through and trying to see on those lovely logbooks, okay, well, was there a rhyme or reason? So were we suspending at the same time every day and therefore we could change the basal rate? But over time and after years and years of people being on it and CareLink data and specialists around the world looking at it, including yourselves, what we realized is that actually it was quite random. And what that means is that there are times in the day where even if you have the perfect basal rate, that actually you have times that you don't actually need any insulin being delivered. And that was really important for us to learn going into 670. So then the interesting thing that we learned is that we looked at, when we started doing the trials for 670, we had a look at the fact that the same person, 4 nights in the same week. So we're trying to make sure that we've got the right person. And I'm going to draw your attention to overnight, because that's obviously where we have the least amount of variability of confounding factors. And I'll draw your attention to this part that we've highlighted in pink. So this is the same person. So we're looking at intra-subject variability. And what you can see is, of those 4 pink highlighted areas, that was actually the basal insulin needs that were given to that person during this trial. And what we learned was that even in the same person, even in the same week, where we shouldn't have that many confounding factors, the basal insulin needs are completely different. We've taken out during the day where we've got exercise, or we've got food, or we've got a whole lot of different things, and we've said, okay, overnight, where it should be relatively stable, what happens? And this was really revolutionary to us, because it was information that now shows us that even with a perfect basal rate, it would never be able to match the individual. We know that people who don't have diabetes obviously have very basal or any insulin delivery, because it's dependent on what their body needs, and obviously the insulin works a bit more rapidly. But even in someone with diabetes, this concept of being able to actually match the basal insulin delivery in a varied approach, which means every 5 minutes, the sensor is looking at what your blood sugar level is now, what your trajectory is, where you're going, what's been happening, and then adapting the insulin needs to that. What we can see is that it's very different, and no 2 nights, even in the same person, have ever been the same. So that's really important for you to understand as a clinician, to know that even when you are trying to do everything right by adapting the basal rates, by trying to do different things, realistically, because insulin needs vary, we actually need to vary the way that the insulin is delivered. And 670 is the first time that we've been able to do that based on technology. So the other thing that's really important to consider, taking a step back from physiology and talking about something that's really important for diabetes today, is diabetes burnout. So we know that less than 33% of people with type 1 diabetes feel like they have been successful with their current therapy. And this study was done, it was taking a variety of people and looking at it and really honing in on this concept of diabetes burnout. If you talk to people who have diabetes, some of the things that they say is that it affects every part of their day, every day. They have to think about it all the time. They have to think about their food, their exercise, all these different things. And their entire life is spent in this whole concept of planning and making sure that they've done the right things, and then adapting everything to make sure that they do that. And the depression rates are extremely high in people with diabetes. And there's a lot of people that talk about this concept of diabetes burnout and feel it, that they just want to be able to have a break. So the next thing that I want to talk about when we look at that is this concept around, well, what does diabetes burnout actually mean? And a lot of people say, well, it's about how many times they have to test their sugar and how many times they have to do a finger prick. And a lot of the technology that we have is moving towards less calibrations, less having to test all these things. But actually, when we started really digging into it, what came out is that the burden is actually the thinking about having to do things. So the way that I explain this is, if we think about brushing our teeth. If you get told 10 times a day, go brush your teeth, and all you have to do is take your toothbrush and brush your teeth, it may not be that complicated. But when you start having to say, okay, I want you to brush your teeth, but before you brush, I want you to think, when was the last time, and how much have you eaten, and how many germs will be there? How hard should you brush? And should you brush more to the left or right? And then if you've done that, but then afterwards you're going to go and have some tea or coffee, is that going to then stain your teeth and then you have to brush again? And how does that affect it? And if you take these 2 different concepts, this is what people with diabetes are constantly thinking about, right? One is the calibration, having to finger prick, which does happen a lot more in 670. And the other is having to think about what that calibration means and what they have to do with that information. And what 670 does is, while you may have to test a little bit more frequently, by staying in auto mode, it takes out the thought processes around, what do I have to do all the time? Because what the pump and CGM system are designed to do is actually keep you at a consistent level. And this has been really important for us to learn, so that we can understand what it is that people with diabetes mean when we're talking about diabetes burnout. The real evidence behind this was actually a study that was done that was presented at ATTD. And it was a really small study. It was 47 people, but it was people that had transitioned from MDI onto the MiniMed 670G. And we asked a whole lot of questions around, well, what does that look like? And were your expectations met? And a few things that I want you to think about when you're looking at this. There's a part here that says that you were not the person was not concerned with variability in their glucose levels. Prior to going on, 11% of people agreed with that statement. Now, if we think about that, 1 in 10 basically people felt like they weren't concerned with variability, which is horrific in itself, and it's really sad, but I'm sure it's something that you see every day. But then when we finished the study, 5 in 10, so 52% of people said that they felt like it wasn't a concern. If we look at something that says it's not been a concern to me, not been a burden, spending time thinking about lows, 28% of people in the beginning felt that way. And at the end, 70% said that they felt comfortable with it. The overall satisfaction, the overall improvement in health, all these things, better A1C was 98%. So I guess what's really important about 670, we can talk about clinical outcomes, and we can talk about the fact that there's 72% time in range and how critical that is. And we all know from an outcome perspective, from a long-term complication, how important that is. But the other thing that I would urge you to consider is how important this is for someone with diabetes in terms of what burnout means to them. And what 670G actually does is gives people just a little bit more freedom, a little bit more time to focus on things outside of their diabetes. That means that they have more time to be themselves and less time to be whoever they are as someone who has type 1 diabetes. So I hope that everyone found that really useful and that you take something away from it. Our team are always here to help answer any questions that you have or talk to you about any of the evidence and help work through getting people started and getting the right outcomes. At the end of the day, if we can make diabetes a little bit easier for everyone, that's a great thing that we can do together. Thank you so much for your time.